The cold, metal walls of the Galactic prison were silent, but the air inside buzzed with an electric tension. Inside the dimly lit corridors, the cacophony of shuffling footsteps, muttered curses, and the occasional clang of a distant door reverberated through the halls. Galactic incarceration was never a peaceful affair, and this facility, located in the heart of the Serenix system, was no exception. It was a place where the most dangerous criminals from across the universe were sent to rot, a massive fortress known as Barrel 9. But today, something was different. Dante the Dagger Crawl, a notorious human crime boss, had just been transferred to Barrel 9. His reputation had crossed galaxies, and there were whispers even in the farthest reaches of the galaxy about the human who had single-handedly toppled entire criminal syndicates on more than one occasion. The prison guards, who had spent years dealing with alien convicts, were unprepared for the chaos that Dante would bring to their orderly world. He was about to turn their carefully constructed hierarchy upside down, and he knew it. Dante leaned against the cold bars of his new cell, staring out at the row upon row of prison blocks that stretched into the distance. His eyes narrowed as his mind raced. He wasn't just going to sit idly by and let some alien goons treat him like just another inmate. The Serenix system's guards might not know much about him, but the inmates? They would. They would remember the name Crawl, the man who took down the biggest crime bosses and left a trail of wreckage in his wake. First mistake, Dante muttered under his breath as a guard passed by. The guards looked at him, sizing him up, but he paid them no attention. They were nothing to him. His focus was on the true challenge, what he had heard about the infamous leader of this facility, a terrifying alien crime boss known as Shorn the Glutton. Shorn had built a criminal empire within the prison's walls. The alien was a behemoth, with scales like iron plating and a ravenous hunger for control. The other inmates feared him, and they paid tribute to him with their resources and labor. It was clear from the guards' nervous glances and hushed conversations that Shorn was untouchable here. But there was a twist: the alien crime boss had a weakness. Dante had learned all he needed to know about Shorn's obsession with power and his insatiable desire to control everything. And that was where the opportunity lay. I need to find him. And when I do, I'll show these scum who the real boss is, Dante muttered, tapping the side of his neck where a small, metallic implant pulsed faintly under his skin. A simple device, a tool of his craft. It could slice through anything, except his own fate. But Dante had survived worse. He had escaped from traps more elaborate than this, outwitted forces that were far more organized and dangerous. Shorn was just another obstacle to overcome. But Dante wasn't alone in his thoughts. At the other end of the prison block, a smaller figure lingered near the edge of the hallway, eyes darting nervously as if weighing his next move. Riza was an unlikely ally, a tech-savvy human hacker who had been caught in a legal blunder and thrown into Barrel 9. He was lanky, pale, and frail compared to the hulking prisoners he shared his cell with, but what he lacked in physical strength, he more than made up for with his sharp intellect. Riza had quickly realized the magnitude of Dante's reputation, and now, he was debating whether to approach him. "You're Dante Crawl, right?" Riza called out cautiously from a few feet away, careful not to get too close. "I've heard the stories." Dante turned, his expression unreadable, but his eyes gleamed with a predatory curiosity. "You don't look like the type who'd be interested in my stories," he said dryly. "I'm not interested in stories. I'm interested in making it out of here alive," Riza replied, his voice shaking slightly but his determination clear. "And if I know anything about you, Crawl, you don't just survive. You win." Dante's lips curled into a smile. "You got that right. And you're right about one thing: if you're trying to make it out of here alive, you'll need to be smart." Riza hesitated for a moment before stepping closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "I've got a plan. I can help you, but only if you help me. There's a way out of here, but it's not going to be easy." Dante raised an eyebrow, intrigued. He knew he couldn't escape Barrel 9 alone, not without causing a major scene. But Riza? Riza was an unknown, and unknowns were often the key to success. "Go on," Dante said, his tone skeptical but willing to listen. Riza's eyes flickered with a mix of fear and excitement. I've been listening to the guards, watching the flow of things. There's a weak spot in their system, a blind spot they've overlooked. I can hack into their security grid, disable their cameras, open doors remotely, create chaos. That's when you make your move. Dante nodded slowly, considering the offer. And what do you want in return? Riza gulped, clearly nervous. I want to get out of here. And I want you to make sure I don't end up dead in some remote cell after we escape. That's all. You get your shot at Shorn, and I get out of this hellhole. Dante considered the terms. Riza wasn't lying, that much was clear. He could be useful, even if his motives were self-serving. You got yourself a deal, Dante said, his tone decisive. But don't think for a second that I'm doing this for your sake. You stay out of my way, and we'll both walk out of this. The two men shared a brief but knowing glance before Dante turned toward the far end of the hallway, where a group of aliens were gathered around a table, speaking in hushed tones. One of them, a hulking figure with sharp, elongated features, caught his eye. That was the one who would eventually lead him to Shorn. A prison break was not the only thing that was brewing inside Barrel 9. The galaxy was about to witness a collision of two worlds, the ruthless, alien underworld led by Shorn and the unyielding, unpredictable human force of nature that was Dante Crawl. One would fall, and only one would remain standing. And the clock was ticking. Dante and Riza moved through the labyrinthine corridors of Barrel 9, the clang of metal doors and the muffled voices of inmates creating a dull background hum to their quiet conversation. The tension in the air was palpable, as if every corner they turned could lead to their downfall. But Dante was unfazed, his mind always 5 steps ahead of the situation. Riza, on the other hand, was more than a little nervous, his hands twitching at his sides as they ventured deeper into the heart of the prison. They had one shot at this. No room for mistakes. What's the plan again? Riza asked, glancing around, as if the walls themselves might be listening in. Dante shot him a sideways glance, his voice low. The plan is simple, we disable the security grid, create a distraction, and I deal with Shorn. You just make sure we don't end up getting locked up in the deepest, most unfindable cell in this place. Riza nodded quickly, though doubt still lingered in his eyes. Right, simple. You keep saying that, but, I don't think I'm built for this. His hands tightened around the small device hidden in his palm, the hacking tool he'd smuggled from the black market upon his arrival. Dante grinned, the sharpness of his teeth catching the dim light. Don't worry. You'll be fine as long as you follow my lead. As they reached an unassuming junction in the prison's maze-like halls, Riza paused. He looked at Dante, then quickly looked over his shoulder. Okay, here we go, Riza muttered, his fingers moving deftly over the device. With a few clicks and a low hum, a small holographic display appeared in front of him, showing a live feed of the prison's security systems. It's more complicated than I thought, Riza said, brows furrowing as he studied the intricate layout. I'll need a few minutes to get through their firewalls. Time we don't have, Dante said, his tone harsh but not without understanding. I'll handle things out here. You focus on what you're good at. Riza swallowed hard but nodded, stepping back to a secluded alcove. Dante could see the beads of sweat forming on his forehead, but the hacker was still doing his job, his eyes glued to the device. The countdown had begun. Dante scanned the hallway, his senses alert. He had been in situations like this before, but never quite like this. Barrel 9 wasn't just a prison, it was a fortress. Everything here was designed to ensure that no one got out, let alone caused a stir. But Dante wasn't concerned about the odds. He was used to defying them. The real challenge was Shorn, the alien crime boss who controlled everything within these walls, and his reputation was as monstrous as his appearance. Rumor had it that Shorn had eyes everywhere, cameras, spies, and informants all working to maintain his stranglehold on the prison. It wouldn't be easy to take him down. But Dante had dealt with worse. And this time, he wasn't alone. A sudden flicker of motion caught his attention. A group of Shorn's enforcers were rounding the corner, massive reptilian beings, their scales gleaming under the flickering fluorescent lights. Dante's hand instinctively went to the hilt of the knife strapped to his side. These were not the typical prison guards, these were Shorn's personal muscle. One of them, a hulking brute with crimson scales, flashed a toothy grin as his eyes locked onto Dante. "Look what we have here," the alien said in a deep, guttural voice. "A little lost human. Shouldn't you be in your cell?" Dante's eyes narrowed. This was the kind of challenge he relished, the type where he could make a statement, not just survive. The other enforcers moved closer, their predatory gazes scanning him for any sign of weakness. But Dante was no rookie, and he knew exactly how to play this. "You don't want to do this," Dante said, his voice calm, even amused. He knew the reputation of Shorn's enforcers. They were used to intimidation, used to getting their way. They had a way of making people fear them with their sheer size. Dante wasn't afraid. He knew exactly how to turn the tables. The brute snarled, taking a step forward. "You think you're special, human? You think you can take down Shorn? You're just another meal for him." Dante's lips curled into a smile. "I've eaten worse." Without another word, the brutish enforcer lunged at Dante, but the human was already moving. With a fluid motion, Dante sidestepped the attack, drawing his knife in one smooth stroke. The blade sliced through the air, catching the enforcer across the arm, and a flash of red light erupted from the alien's skin where the blade made contact. The enforcer howled, stumbling back in pain. The other enforcers froze for a moment, shocked by the speed of the attack. It wasn't often that someone stood their ground against them, let alone managed to land a hit. But Dante wasn't finished yet. He was never finished. The second enforcer, slighter, but equally deadly, rushed in from the side. Dante spun, his knife flashing once again as he cut a shallow but precise gash along the alien's side. The enforcer staggered back, clutching at the wound, but Dante didn't give him a chance to recover. "Move, Riza!" Dante shouted as he parried another blow, slamming the enforcer's arm away. "Do your thing." Riza, who had been watching in horror from his hiding spot, finally sprang into action. His fingers flew across the device, hacking into the prison systems with a speed that seemed almost frantic. The alarms began to go off, and the lights above them blinked erratically. The security grid faltered, causing the cameras to flicker and shut down, allowing Riza the brief moment he needed. Dante, however, wasn't waiting around for more. He launched himself at the remaining enforcer, ducking under a strike, and then slamming the flat of his knife into the alien's throat. The enforcer gasped, stumbling back, clutching at his neck as he collapsed to the ground in a heap. Dante's breath was steady, his pulse thrumming with adrenaline. He turned to Riza, who was still working on the device, sweat pouring down his face. "You're almost there, right?" Riza's eyes flickered up, fear and excitement in equal measure. "I'm in. Security's down. But we've got company heading this way, Shorn's other enforcers." "Good," Dante said, grinning as he wiped his blade clean. "Let's see how they like a real challenge." The prison walls were closing in, but for Dante Krall, this was just the beginning. He wasn't just fighting for freedom, he was about to take down a criminal empire from the inside out. And no one, not even Shorn, was going to stop him. The air inside Barrel 9 had grown heavy with the weight of impending conflict. The alarms blared in shrill succession, their discordant shrieks reverberating down the prison's long corridors, signaling a breakdown in security. Dante Krall's eyes flickered with anticipation as he stood in the shadow of a nearby bulkhead, his mind already processing the next few steps in his escape plan. "Let's move," Dante ordered, his voice cold but confident. Riza, who had finally managed to breach the security system, was still reeling from the whirlwind of activity. He glanced nervously at the flashing lights and the rapidly approaching sounds of boots pounding down the hall. The enforcers were coming, and they were coming fast. Riza's knuckles whitened as he clutched the device in his hands, but he had no choice now. The plan had escalated. There was no turning back. All right. Riza stammered, adjusting the device and glancing at the darkened security cameras that now blinked uselessly above them. "I've got full control of their network, well, at least for now." "You'd better keep it that way," Dante muttered, his eyes scanning the hallway. His hand brushed over the hilt of his knife, his muscles taut and ready for the next confrontation. "We don't have much time. We need to get to the central control room, or everything we've done so far will be for nothing." Riza nodded, more to himself than to Dante. The hacker had been in plenty of sticky situations in his life, but this was unlike anything he had ever experienced. There were no backup plans, no exit strategies. If they failed, they were done for. Dante led the way, his movements swift and fluid. Despite the heightened security, the chaos he had unleashed was working in his favor. Guards and enforcers were scattered, unsure of where to focus their efforts. They had no idea who was responsible for the breach, but it was clear they were scrambling to contain the situation. Dante couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The tables had turned. This was no longer a prison where the inmates cowered, it was a battleground, and he was taking control. They rounded a corner, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the hall. Riza froze, panic seizing his throat. A group of heavily armed enforcers was heading straight for them. The lead enforcer, a towering, scarred creature with a gleaming mechanical arm, spotted them immediately. "Intruders," he bellowed, drawing a massive energy rifle from his back. "Stop them!" Dante's eyes flickered briefly to Riza. "Run," he shouted, his tone commanding. Riza didn't need to be told twice. His legs moved before his brain could fully process the command, and he darted down the hall, hoping to find cover. Dante, however, remained unmoving, his posture steady and his face calm. The enforcers were closing in fast, their weapons trained on him. Dante's mind raced as he calculated his next move. The lead enforcer fired first, a bright pulse of energy speeding toward Dante. He didn't flinch, he didn't even look directly at the shot. Instead, he moved with an inhuman speed, his body twisting just enough to avoid the blast. It whizzed past him, grazing the side of his jacket. With a motion as fluid as water, Dante threw himself forward, closing the gap between him and the enforcers. He didn't have time for finesse. With a sharp, practiced movement, Dante unsheathed his knife and lunged at the nearest enforcer, slashing through the alien's energy shield with a well-placed strike. The shield flickered and crackled, its energy dissipating as the enforcer recoiled in pain. Dante was already moving again, his blade dancing through the air as it found its mark. A quick jab to the alien's side sent the enforcer crumpling to the ground, dead before it even hit the floor. The other enforcers hesitated for a split second, caught off guard by the ferocity of the attack. But that hesitation was all Dante needed. He lunged toward the next enforcer, this time dodging a wide arc of gunfire and spinning low to avoid the next blast. His knife found the alien's midsection, and Dante twisted the blade with surgical precision, incapacitating the creature in seconds. Behind him, Riza was still running. He was fast, faster than Dante had given him credit for, but the sound of more enforcers heading in their direction had him sweating bullets. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. "Move!" Dante shouted as he disengaged from the last enforcer, turning toward Riza and pushing forward. The hacker was just ahead, eyes wide as he tried to stay ahead of the oncoming threat. Dante reached his side, grabbing his arm and pulling him down a side passage, deeper into the heart of Barrel 9. "We're not out yet," Dante muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "Keep moving." Riza was breathless, his thoughts racing as they sprinted through the labyrinthine corridors. He could hear the enforcers' footsteps behind them, growing louder, faster. They weren't far off. "Where the hell are we going?" Riza asked, his voice cracking with a mix of exhaustion and panic. "To the control room," Dante answered curtly. "You get us there, I'll deal with the rest." They turned another corner, and there it was, the central hub of Barrel 9's security system. The doors were reinforced, designed to withstand the most brutal of attacks, but Riza had already hacked the system. With a swift motion, he punched in the final sequence, and the massive doors slid open with a mechanical hiss. Inside, the heart of Barrel 9's operations sprawled out before them. A wall of screens displayed live feeds from across the prison, and control terminals blinked with a variety of data. Riza approached the closest terminal, already typing furiously. "Got it," Riza said, a hint of triumph in his voice. "I've gained access to all the internal systems. They won't be able to track us now. But I can't hold them off for long." Dante gave him a single nod. "Just get us what we need." Riza's fingers flew across the console, his eyes scanning the data streams with practiced speed. His work wasn't done yet, but every moment spent hacking brought them closer to their goal. Outside, the sounds of pursuit grew louder as the enforcers closed in on their location. Suddenly, the lights in the control room flickered, and Dante's grip on his knife tightened. He felt the change in the air, a shift in the balance of power. His instincts told him that something wasn't right. The door behind them slammed open with a deafening bang. A shadow filled the doorway, a massive figure, shrouded in the dim light. The last enforcer. "No escape," it growled, its voice a low rumble of thunder. Its gleaming mechanical arm was raised, ready to strike. Dante didn't hesitate. With a flash of movement, he darted forward, his knife poised to strike. The enforcer charged, its mechanical arm a blur of motion. But Dante was faster. He ducked under the first swing, his feet moving with predatory grace as he closed the gap. He could hear Riza behind him, his breathing shallow and frantic, but Dante's focus remained sharp, his entire world narrowing down to this singular moment. With a quick thrust, Dante drove his knife into the enforcer's vulnerable side, twisting it with a swift motion. The alien let out a choking sound as it staggered, its mechanical arm faltering as sparks erupted from the joints. With a final, decisive strike, Dante incapacitated the enforcer, sending it crashing to the ground. The room fell silent for a moment, save for the rapid beeping of Riza's console. "I think we're clear," Riza said, his voice unsteady. "For now." Dante wiped the blood from his blade, his gaze never leaving the door. But inside, his heart beat steady, his mind already moving on to the next step. Shorn wouldn't be far behind. The real battle was yet to come. The echoes of battle still reverberated in the air as Dante Krall stood over the incapacitated enforcer, his eyes scanning the room. The control center of Barrel 9, now momentarily secure, was a flurry of flashing screens and blinking indicators. But despite the temporary silence, Dante knew that the Real challenge was only just beginning. The prison had a heartbeat, and it was still alive, pulsing with the movements of its countless guards, enforcers, and worst of all, Shorn himself. Riza had dropped to the terminal, his fingers flying across the console with urgency. Sweat beaded on his brow as he bypassed the last layer of security and accessed the prison's central system. "I've got the internal schematics," Riza muttered. "If we're going to make it out, we need to disable the last line of defense, the automated sentry drones. They're just about to activate." Dante gave a nod, not bothering to say anything. He had learned long ago that time was precious in situations like these. They couldn't afford to linger. The longer they stayed in one place, the more likely they were to face an overwhelming counterattack. And with Shorn's reputation, Dante knew that he wasn't the type to let any insurrection go unanswered. They had to move, and they had to move fast. "Just a few more seconds," Riza added, his voice trembling slightly with the tension. Dante could tell his friend was nearing the edge of his limit. But there was no time to coddle him now. Dante glanced over his shoulder toward the sealed entrance to the control room. The hallway outside was silent for now, but Dante knew better than to trust silence in a place like this. Shorn's reach extended far beyond the walls of this room, and the reinforcements would be on their way. They would need more than just a good hack and a sharp blade to survive this. Suddenly, a low hum vibrated through the floor, and the lights flickered briefly. Riza froze, his fingers stuttering over the keys. "It's starting," he said, a note of panic creeping into his voice. "The sentries are online." The automated drones had been the last line of defense for Barrel 9, an impenetrable system of surveillance and lethal force that could wipe out any intruders with brutal efficiency. If they were activated, there would be no escape. The sentries operated without mercy, no hesitation, no compromise. Dante stepped closer to Riza, his voice calm but forceful. "You've got this. Get it done." The hum grew louder as the sentries powered up, their weapon systems coming online with an eerie whine. Outside the control room, the distant sound of boots echoed again. Shorn's forces were closing in. With one final keystroke, Riza let out a relieved exhale. "Done. The sentries are offline," he said. His voice had a slightly shakier edge to it now, but there was triumph in his words. "We've got a clear shot to the exit. The only thing we need to do now is get to the hangar." Dante's eyes hardened, a spark of determination igniting in his chest. He glanced once more at the door. They were still far from safe. "Then let's move." They ran, the floor beneath them trembling with the impending arrival of their enemies. As they passed through a series of corridors, Dante could hear the sounds of pursuit growing nearer. Shorn's enforcers had regained their composure, and they weren't wasting any more time. The alarms were louder now, blaring through the halls as the prison reacted to the breach. Riza stumbled as they rounded another corner, but Dante's hand was there to steady him. "Keep going," Dante urged, though his own pace never faltered. The hangar was on the far side of Barrel 9, hidden behind layers of security and reinforced by blast doors. It was the only exit that wasn't completely locked down. The problem was, Shorn's forces knew it too. 3 more corridors, Riza panted, glancing back. The hacker's face was pale, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was slowing down, but Dante didn't have the luxury to let up. They had to keep pushing. Without warning, the sound of gunfire cracked through the air, followed by a deep thud of an explosion. The blast sent debris scattering in every direction, and a screech of metal echoed from behind them. Riza turned his head, his eyes wide in fear. "They're here!" Dante didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Riza by the arm, dragging him into the nearest alcove. The walls shook with another explosion, and the blast doors to the hangar began to slide open slowly. Dante glanced at the control panel next to them, his mind already working, already calculating. "Get to the hangar," Dante ordered, his voice terse. "I'll hold them off." Riza hesitated for a moment, looking from the hangar doors to Dante. "What?" "No, we can't." "Don't argue with me," Dante interrupted. "I'll catch up." Riza hesitated for a heartbeat longer, but when another blast rattled the walls, he turned and sprinted down the hall, his footsteps fading quickly. Dante exhaled, his focus now entirely on the task at hand. The sounds of footfalls grew louder, and soon, the hallway was filled with the harsh clanging of boots and the mechanical whir of Shorn's enforcers. The doors behind him slid open to reveal a group of soldiers, 6, maybe 7 of them, armed to the teeth and ready to end this once and for all. Dante didn't wait for them to make the first move. His body was already in motion, his knife slicing through the air as he charged forward. The first enforcer fell with a flash of blood as the blade found its target. The second one fired, but Dante was already on him, moving faster than the eye could track. A swift punch to the chest sent the enforcer into a wall, knocking the wind from its lungs. But there were too many. Too many for one man to handle. More enforcers poured in from the hallway, their weapons raised, their eyes narrowed with rage. Dante didn't stop. His body moved with practiced fluidity, ducking, dodging, and slicing through his enemies, but the numbers were overwhelming. Each new wave of attackers only seemed to increase his resolve, the adrenaline pumping through his veins. Then, just as the situation seemed to be spiraling out of control, the room was suddenly filled with a deafening, shrill noise. The blast doors to the hangar opened fully. And in the distance, Dante could see Riza's silhouette, the hacker standing at the edge of the docking bay, waving frantically. He'd activated the final sequence. "Dante!" Riza shouted. "Get to the ship, now!" The hangar was within reach. Dante's heart pounded in his chest as he took one last glance at the advancing enforcers. His legs were already moving before his mind had fully processed the thought. He sprinted toward the hangar, his body a blur as he evaded gunfire and swung his knife in one final arc, disabling the closest enforcer. The rest scattered, knowing they couldn't catch him now. He dove into the ship, crashing into the controls and slamming the door shut behind him. Riza was already in the pilot's seat, fingers flying across the console. With a lurch, the ship's engines roared to life, and the hangar doors began to close behind them, sealing off their enemies. As the ship shot into the atmosphere, breaking free of the prison's gravitational pull, Dante leaned back in his seat, his breathing ragged but controlled. Riza let out a relieved laugh, wiping sweat from his brow. "We did it," Riza said, his voice barely above a whisper. Dante glanced out of the viewports, watching the receding silhouette of Barrel 9 as the prison shrank into the distance. His heart was still racing, but there was a new sense of victory in the air, a hard-earned, well-deserved victory. "Yeah," Dante said, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "We did." And just like that, they were free.